Marcus Hill thought his morning drive was the safest part of his day. Same road, same routine, just a black man heading to work, mind on bills and responsibilities. But on a quiet stretch where traffic cameras never seemed to work, police lights flashed. Marcus asked for names, for procedure, for the law to be followed. He was answered with force. What they didn't know was that a 10-year-old boy nearby was recording everything. In that moment, silence became evidence and truth found its witness. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The city of Oak Ridge woke slowly under a pale autumn sky. A thin layer of gray clouds hung low, muting the morning light and softening the edges of buildings and streets. The air was cool but calm, the kind of weather that made people pull their jackets a little tighter and move with quiet purpose. Traffic was light, storefronts were just beginning to open, and the city felt suspended between sleep and routine. For Marcus Hill, mornings like this were familiar. Marcus Hill was 34 years old, a black man of average height with a solid working build shaped by years of physical labor. His skin was a deep, even brown, his face defined by a strong jawline and thoughtful eyes that often appeared tired but alert. He kept his hair closely cropped, not for style, but for simplicity. He didn't like unnecessary attention. His clothes reflected that. Plain dark jeans, a gray hoodie, and worn work boots that had seen countless job sites. Marcus worked as an electrical maintenance technician for the city's utility department. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, honest work. He fixed what others depended on but rarely noticed. Power lines, control boxes, underground systems that kept lights on and hospitals running. The job demanded patience and precision, qualities Marcus had learned early in life. Growing up in Oak Ridge's South End, Marcus learned how easily misunderstandings could turn dangerous. His father, a quiet man who worked 2 jobs, taught him a simple rule. Stay calm. Speak clearly. Don't give anyone a reason to misunderstand you. That lesson shaped Marcus into someone who believed in order, rules, and doing things the right way. That morning, he was driving his aging sedan along Oak Ridge Parkway, a wide, straight road that cut through an industrial residential stretch of the city. He took this route every weekday. Same turns, same traffic lights, same faded billboards advertising services no one seemed to need anymore. His phone buzzed briefly in the center console. A message from Sarah. Sarah Hill, his wife, was 32, tall and slender with warm brown skin and expressive eyes that carried both kindness and quiet strength. She worked as a nurse at a local clinic and had a way of speaking gently even when exhausted. Years earlier, a violent patient encounter at the clinic had changed her. She became more cautious, more aware of how quickly normal moments could shift. Still, she believed deeply in people and in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. The message was simple. Drive safe. Dinner's on you tonight. Marcus smiled faintly and set the phone back down. He was thinking about work schedules, about a broken transformer he'd been assigned to inspect, when flashing red and blue lights suddenly appeared in his rearview mirror. He frowned slightly and eased his car to the side of the road. 2 police vehicles pulled in behind him. The stretch of Oak Ridge Parkway where he stopped was unusually quiet. No storefronts, no pedestrians, just empty sidewalks, a long metal fence bordering an old warehouse, and a set of traffic cameras mounted on poles overhead. Dark and lifeless, as they often were. 2 officers stepped out. The first was Officer Daniel Reeves, mid-20s, white, broad-shouldered, with a stiff posture that suggested inexperience masked by authority. His uniform looked new, his badge polished. His expression was tight, jaw clenched, eyes sharp in a way that felt more defensive than confident. The second was Officer Mark Collins, older, early 40s, heavier build with a tired face and narrowed eyes. He moved slower, deliberately, as if he'd learned to conserve energy and patience over the years. There was something practiced about his indifference. They approached Marcus's car from opposite sides. "License and registration," Reeves said, voice flat. Marcus complied without hesitation, keeping his hands visible, movement steady. His heart rate increased slightly, but his face remained calm. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" Marcus said politely. Reeves hesitated, glancing briefly at Collins. "Routine check," Collins replied. "Sit tight." Marcus nodded, but something felt off. He'd been driving within the speed limit. His car had no visible issues, and routine checks weren't usually conducted here, especially not on a road known for malfunctioning surveillance. He took a breath. "Officer," Marcus said evenly, "I'd like to see the written authorization for this stop, and I'm requesting your badge numbers, please." The atmosphere shifted immediately. Reeves's shoulders stiffened. His eyes hardened. "You refusing to cooperate?" he asked. "No," Marcus said calmly. "I'm asking for procedure to be followed." Collins exhaled through his nose, irritation flickering across his face. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. Marcus remained seated, hands resting on the steering wheel, voice steady. "I'm not trying to cause problems, I just want to understand the reason I'm being detained." Reeves took a step closer to the car. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus paused, confusion passing briefly through his eyes. "Am I being detained, or am I free to go?" he asked. The question seemed to ignite something. Reeves reached for the door handle. "Step. Out. Now." Across the street, in a modest two-story apartment building, 10-year-old Ethan Parker sat at a small desk near the window. Ethan was a quiet child, thin, with light brown hair that fell into his eyes when he concentrated. He wore oversized glasses and a faded hoodie, legs swinging nervously beneath the chair. Ethan's parents were both at work. He was used to being alone for short periods, filling the time with homework and reading. That morning, he'd been practicing spelling words when flashing lights caught his attention. He stood slowly and looked out the window. From his elevated view, Ethan could see the entire scene unfold below. The police cars, the man in the driver's seat, the way the officer's body language seemed tense. Something about it didn't feel right. Without fully understanding why, Ethan reached for his phone. It was an old model, cracked at the corner, mostly used for emergencies and school apps. His hands trembled slightly as he began recording. Back on the road, Marcus felt the moment slipping away from calm into danger. "I'm not resisting," he said clearly. "I'm asking for your names and the reason for—" Reeves yanked the door open. In seconds, the situation escalated beyond words. Marcus was pulled from the car, his shoulder hitting the frame. He stumbled, but stayed on his feet. He repeated himself, "I'm not resisting," even as hands forced his arms behind his back. The road remained empty. No passing cars slowed. No cameras blinked to life. From his window, Ethan watched in silence, phone held tight, capturing every word, every movement, every shift in tone. The city of Oak Ridge continued its morning routine, unaware that on a quiet stretch of pavement, something had just changed. And none of them knew yet that this moment would echo far beyond Oak Ridge Parkway. Marcus Hill did not raise his voice. Even as the situation tightened around him like a closing fist, he held on to the habits that had kept him safe for most of his adult life. His back was straight, his hands visible, his words chosen carefully. He spoke slowly, clearly, reminding himself that calm was not weakness, and silence was not consent. "I am not refusing," Marcus said, his tone measured. "I am asserting my rights as a citizen. Please state the reason for this detention." Officer Daniel Reeves stood close now, too close. From this distance, Marcus could see the faint redness around the young officer's neck, the shallow breathing that betrayed impatience. Reeves was the kind of man who wore authority like armor, newly issued, still uncomfortable, still untested. His eyes flicked between Marcus's face and his hands, searching for something that would justify what he already seemed determined to do. Behind him, Officer Mark Collins watched with folded arms. Collins had been on the force long enough to recognize when a situation could still be diffused, and long enough to know when he no longer cared to try. His heavier frame leaned slightly back, weight resting on one leg, as if he were observing rather than participating. His face showed mild annoyance, the look of someone inconvenienced by procedure. "Last warning," Reeves said. "Step away from the vehicle." Marcus felt the shift. The words were no longer about compliance, they were about control. He glanced briefly down the road, empty, silent, indifferent. The traffic cameras above them remained dark, their small red lights unlit. He had noticed that before, during other drives, and now the absence felt heavy, deliberate. "I am not resisting," Marcus repeated. "I'm asking you to follow the law the same way you're asking me to." The response came without warning. Reeves grabbed Marcus's arm and twisted, pulling him forward. Marcus stumbled as his shoulder struck the door frame. Pain shot through his upper arm, sharp and sudden, but he did not lash out. He did not swing back. He did not shout. He steadied himself and repeated the same words again, louder this time for the record he hoped still existed somewhere. "I am not resisting." Collins moved in then, faster than before, his weight pressing Marcus forward as his arms were forced behind his back. Cold metal bit into Marcus's wrists as handcuffs snapped shut. The sound echoed in the empty street, loud, final, undeniable. "This is what happens when you don't cooperate," Reeves said, breath close to Marcus's ear. Marcus clenched his jaw, not in anger, but in disbelief. He had done everything he was taught to do, everything he believed in. And still, reason had slipped past unheard. Across the street, high above the pavement, Ethan Parker felt his chest tighten. Ethan was 10 years old, small for his age, with narrow shoulders and restless hands. He had always been observant, the kind of child who noticed tone shifts in conversations and silences at dinner tables. His teachers said he was thoughtful, but anxious. Since his mother's car accident 2 years earlier, a crash that left her with lingering pain and forced his father to work longer hours, Ethan had become more cautious, more aware of how quickly things could go wrong. From his bedroom window, he saw the man being pushed against the car. He heard fragments of voices carried upward by the cool air. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure someone would hear it. He lowered himself to the floor, phone still raised, hands shaking. The device was old, its screen cracked, the battery unreliable. It belonged to his mother, Sarah Parker, a woman who carried quiet strength beneath constant exhaustion. Sarah was in her late 30s, average height with soft features hardened slightly by years of responsibility. Since the accident, she moved more carefully, spoke more deliberately, and taught Ethan one lesson above all others. If something feels wrong, pay attention. Ethan remembered that now. He wanted to stop recording. His fingers hovered over the screen. Fear crawled up his spine. Fear of being seen. Fear of doing something he didn't fully understand. But when he saw Marcus's face pressed briefly against the car window, eyes steady despite the force, something held him in place. Marcus was not shouting. He was not struggling. He was still trying to explain. So Ethan kept recording. On the street below, Reeves pushed Marcus toward the police vehicle. The older officer opened the back door, his movements efficient, practiced. Marcus was guided, forced, inside, his head ducked down, his legs folded into the cramped space. The door slammed shut. For a moment, everything went quiet. The street returned to stillness, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. No witnesses approached, no cars slowed. The warehouse fence rattled slightly in the breeze. Above it all, the dead cameras stared blankly. Ethan's phone continued to record, capturing the officers as they spoke briefly to one another. Reeves laughed once, short and sharp. Collins checked his watch. Then the engine started. As the police vehicle pulled away, Ethan felt a wave of panic. He leaned forward, stretching his arm to keep the car in frame, afraid the truth would disappear if he let it go too soon. Only when the flashing lights vanished around the corner did he finally lower the phone. His hands were numb. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the blank wall of his room, listening to his own breathing. The video was still saved. He checked twice, 3 times. It was there. Every word, every movement. Down the road, Marcus sat alone in the back of the police car, wrists bound, heart heavy but mind clear. He stared at the metal grate separating him from the front seat and made himself one promise. He would remember every detail, every sentence, every face. Because reason had not been heard on Oak Ridge Parkway that morning. But somewhere, unknown to him, it had been recorded. The courthouse in Oak Ridge stood like a block of gray stone against the sky, solid and unmoved by the people passing through its doors. By the time Marcus Hill was brought in, the morning air had warmed slightly, but inside the building everything felt cold. Floors polished to a dull shine, walls bare except for flags and framed photographs of officials long retired. The atmosphere did not invite conversation. It demanded submission. Marcus wore the same clothes he had been arrested in, now creased and rumpled from hours of confinement. His wrists were free, but the faint red marks from the handcuffs had not faded. He walked with a measured pace, shoulders squared, eyes forward. He looked calm to those watching, but beneath that calm was a careful effort to hold himself together. He had slept little. Every moment of the arrest replayed in his mind, searching for the place where reason had failed him. He stood alone at the defense table. The court-appointed attorney assigned to him that morning was a man named Leonard Bryce, late 40s, balding, with a soft voice and a tired expression. Leonard was not unkind, but he was clearly overworked. His suit was clean but outdated, his briefcase worn at the edges. He spoke quickly, avoiding eye contact, explaining procedures in short sentences that sounded more like obligations than promises. He had skimmed the police report twice and asked Marcus only a few questions. "No witnesses," Leonard said quietly. "No footage. We'll do what we can." Marcus nodded, though the words settled heavily in his chest. He had expected this, but knowing did not make it easier. Across the room, the prosecutor reviewed his notes with confidence. Thomas Hale was a tall white man in his early 50s, neatly groomed, silver at the temples, with a commanding posture that came from years of being listened to. He spoke in a measured tone, practiced and precise, as if every sentence had been rehearsed long before he entered the room. To him, this case was simple, clean, efficient. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Rebecca Monroe presided over the bench, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a controlled demeanor. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her black robe immaculate. She was known in Oak Ridge for valuing order and efficiency above all else. Her courtroom ran on time. Emotions were discouraged. Stories were tolerated only if they fit neatly into procedure. The charges were read: resisting arrest, obstruction of a lawful stop, conduct unbecoming during police engagement. Marcus listened as if the words belonged to someone else. The officers testified first. Their account was direct, rehearsed, and aligned. They spoke of noncompliance, of escalating behavior, of necessary force. They did not raise their voices. They did not hesitate. There was no mention of missing cameras, no acknowledgement of Marcus's request for identification. Marcus took the stand next. He spoke slowly, choosing clarity over emotion. He described his commute, his questions, his efforts to remain calm. He did not accuse. He explained. His voice remained steady, but the room felt distant, unresponsive. The absence of evidence hung over him like a verdict waiting to be spoken. The ruling came swiftly. Based on the testimony presented, the court found sufficient cause to proceed with charges. Bail conditions were set. The case would move forward. It was not a conviction, but it was not relief either. As Marcus was led out, he caught a glimpse of the gallery, faces neutral, uninterested, already turning away. To them, this was another case, another name to forget by lunchtime. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Local news vans lined the curb, reporters adjusting microphones and rehearsing lines. By evening, the story had found its headline: "Black man resists police during routine stop." The words spread quickly, stripped of nuance, reduced to accusation. On television screens across Oak Ridge, Marcus's booking photo appeared. Expression flat, eyes tired. Commentators spoke over the image, speculating without hesitation. Social media followed, faster and harsher. They're always causing trouble. If he wasn't doing anything wrong, why didn't he just comply? The comments stacked endlessly, each one heavier than the last. Marcus sat in his living room that night, lights off, television muted. His wife, Sarah Hill, sat beside him on the couch, her hand resting gently on his arm. Sarah was tall and slim with a quiet presence that made people feel at ease. She had learned compassion early, growing up caring for a younger brother with chronic illness. That experience shaped her into someone patient, observant, deeply empathetic, but also painfully aware of how systems could fail people without warning. She had watched the coverage earlier and turned it off before Marcus came home. "They don't know you," she said softly. Marcus nodded, though the words felt thin against the noise outside their walls. Across town, in a small apartment filled with the hum of an old refrigerator, Ethan Parker sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the television. His mother, Sarah Parker, moved carefully around the kitchen, preparing dinner with slow, deliberate motions. The lingering pain from her accident had never fully left her. It had taught her caution, but also resilience. She noticed the way Ethan's shoulders tensed as the news segment continued. "That's enough," she said gently, reaching for the remote. Ethan didn't answer right away. He recognized the street, the car, the man. His stomach twisted. He turned his gaze downward, thoughts racing. The video was still on his phone. He hadn't shown it to anyone yet. He hadn't known how. Watching the news, hearing the words being used, he felt a sharp pull of guilt, an uncomfortable awareness that he knew something others didn't. He wasn't sure what to do with it. The broadcast ended. The screen went dark. In different corners of the city, the same story settled into different minds, some satisfied by its simplicity, others unsettled by questions they didn't yet know how to ask. And somewhere between accusation and silence, the truth waited, unseen. The apartment was quiet in the way only late evenings could be. Not peaceful, but alert, as if every sound carried extra meaning. The television was off, the lights dimmed. Ethan Parker sat at the small wooden desk in his room, staring at the drawer beneath the desktop. Inside it lay his mother's old phone, powered down, the cracked screen hidden from view. He had placed it there carefully, as if the drawer itself could keep what it contained from spilling into the rest of the world. Ethan was 10, but that night he felt older. The events he had witnessed replayed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. The tone of the officers' voices, the way the man had spoken calmly even as the situation unraveled, the sound of the car door closing. He had watched the news earlier with his parents, silent, his hands clenched in his lap. When the segment ended, no one spoke for a moment. The quiet pressed down on him, heavy with unasked questions. His mother, Sarah Parker, broke the silence first. Sarah was a woman shaped by endurance rather than ease. In her late 30s, she had a soft-spoken manner that often masked her exhaustion. Her hair, once worn loose, was now usually tied back, a practical habit she adopted after the accident. The crash had left her with chronic pain in her back and hip, forcing her to move more slowly, more deliberately, It also changed the way she saw risk. How quickly something ordinary could become irreversible. She looked at Ethan now with concern. "You've been very quiet," she said gently. Ethan nodded, eyes down. "I'm tired." She studied him for a moment, then let it go. She had learned, through physical therapy sessions and long nights awake, that pushing too hard often did more harm than good. Later, when the apartment had settled into nighttime stillness, Ethan returned to his desk. His heart thumped as he opened the drawer. He took out the phone, holding it with both hands. The screen flickered to life, dim but clear enough. His thumb hovered over the video file. He thought of the man's voice. Calm. Clear. He thought of the comments he had seen scrolling beneath the news clip, words sharp and careless. Something inside him tightened. Not fear exactly, but responsibility. Ethan stood and walked down the hallway. His parents were in the living room. His father sat at the dining table, papers spread before him, reading glasses perched low on his nose. Daniel Parker was a tall man in his mid-40s, lean rather than muscular, with graying hair at the temples, and a face that bore the quiet lines of thought rather than age. His presence was steady, unassuming. He dressed simply, favored muted colors, and spoke less than most lawyers people knew. His reputation, however, carried weight. Daniel was known in Oak Ridge for his integrity. He had built his career taking cases others avoided, not for fame, but because he believed the law was only meaningful when applied evenly. Years earlier, a controversial case in which he refused to bend to political pressure had cost him several lucrative clients. It also earned him a reputation for being incorruptible. He accepted the consequences without complaint. "Dad," Ethan said, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked up immediately. "What is it, buddy?" Ethan swallowed. "I need to show you something." Sarah turned toward them, concern sharpening her features. Ethan handed the phone to his father. His fingers trembled slightly as Daniel took it. "What is this?" Daniel asked. I recorded something," Ethan said. "That day. On the street." Daniel's expression shifted. Not alarmed, but attentive. He motioned for Ethan to sit. Sarah moved closer, resting a hand on her son's shoulder. Daniel pressed play. The room filled with sound. The video was unsteady at first, but clear enough. Marcus's voice came through distinctly, calm and measured. The officer's responses followed. Short, dismissive. As the minutes passed, Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the screen. He did not interrupt. He did not speak. When the clip ended, he replayed it. Again. And again. Each time he noticed more. The way Marcus identified himself, the specific language he used when requesting procedure, the officer's refusal to provide names or justification, the precise moment when authority tipped into force without cause. Daniel removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes slowly. "This is complete," he said finally. "You captured everything." Ethan's chest tightened. "Am I in trouble?" Daniel looked at him sharply. "No. No, Ethan, you did the right thing." Sarah exhaled, relief and fear mingling. "Daniel," she said carefully, "what does this mean?" Daniel did not answer immediately. He stared at the paused image on the phone, the frozen moment just before the handcuffs closed. He had seen cases like this before. He had read reports that sounded eerily similar, but rarely did the truth arrive this intact. "This isn't just about one arrest," he said at last. "This is about precedent." He explained slowly, choosing words Ethan could understand. How unchecked authority, when unchallenged, became policy. How silence allowed misconduct to become routine. How a single unrecorded incident could be dismissed, but a documented pattern could not. "This video," Daniel continued, "shows a man asserting his rights and being punished for it. If that stands, it tells everyone else that the law only works one way." Ethan listened. absorbing the weight of his father's tone. Daniel stood and paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. His mind worked through possibilities, implications, risks. He thought of Marcus Hill, unknown to him until now, but suddenly very real. He thought of the courtroom, of how evidence shifted power. "I'm going to keep this," Daniel said, holding up the phone. "But we need to be careful." Sarah nodded. "Do you want to take the case?" Daniel paused. He had not said that. Not yet. But the question lingered between them. "I want to understand it fully," he replied. "And then I want to make sure it's handled correctly." Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. He hadn't expected this moment to grow so large. Daniel knelt in front of his son. "You were brave today," he said quietly. "Bravery doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels heavy, but what you did matters." Ethan nodded, eyes stinging. Later that night, Daniel sat alone at his desk, the video playing once more on his computer. He took notes, timestamps, verbal cues. He compared the footage to the police report he had already pulled online. Discrepancies emerged quickly, clean and undeniable. By the time he shut the laptop, Daniel knew one thing with certainty. This was not just a case. It was a line. And someone had crossed it. The appeal courtroom was smaller than the main trial chamber, but it carried a different kind of weight. It was quieter, more restrained, as if everyone inside understood that this room existed for moments when something had gone wrong the first time. The wooden benches were worn smooth by years of nervous hands and shifting bodies. Light filtered in through tall windows, pale and indifferent, falling across the seal of the court etched into the wall behind the bench. Marcus Hill sat at the defense table again, his posture straight, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He wore a borrowed suit jacket that didn't quite fit his shoulders, the sleeves a fraction too short. Still, he wore it with dignity. He had learned in the days since the first hearing that dignity was something he had to carry himself. No one else would offer it freely. He had slept little the night before. Not from fear, but from the slow exhaustion of being unheard. The memory of the first trial lingered. How his words had seemed to vanish into the air. How procedure had swallowed truth without pause. This hearing felt like another narrow corridor with no clear exit. At his side sat the same court-appointed attorney, Leonard Bryce, his tie slightly crooked, his expression resigned. Leonard spoke softly to Marcus, offering reassurances that sounded practiced rather than hopeful. He was doing his job, but Marcus could feel the limits of that effort. Across the aisle, a few journalists whispered to one another, pens ready, eyes scanning the room for something worth writing down. Most expected a routine proceeding. Few believed anything would change. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Daniel Parker stepped inside. He moved without urgency, but his presence shifted the room almost immediately. Daniel wore a simple dark suit, well-tailored but understated. His graying hair was neatly combed, his expression composed, eyes alert. He carried no briefcase, only a slim folder tucked under his arm. To those unfamiliar with him, he looked like any other attorney arriving late. To those who recognized him, his appearance was unexpected and significant. Whispers rippled through the benches. Daniel paused briefly, scanning the room, then walked toward the defense table. His steps were measured, confident, unhurried. He stopped beside Marcus and introduced himself quietly. "Marcus Hill," he said, extending a hand. "My name is Daniel Parker." Marcus stood, surprised, and shook it. Daniel's grip was firm, steady. "I've reviewed your case," Daniel continued, his voice low. "With your permission, I'd like to represent you today." Marcus searched his face, seeing not urgency or performance, but resolve. He nodded once. "Yes," he said. "I'd appreciate that." Leonard Bryce blinked, startled. Daniel turned to him politely. offering a nod that carried respect rather than dismissal. Leonard stepped back without protest, relief evident in his shoulders. The judge entered, and the room rose. Judge Alan Whitaker presided over the appeal, a man in his late 50s with a tall, lean frame and a thoughtful demeanor. Unlike some of his peers, Whitaker had a reputation for listening carefully before speaking. His hair was thinning, his glasses perched low on his nose, and his gaze was sharp but not unkind. He had built his career on consistency rather than spectacle. As proceedings began, Daniel formally requested permission to appear as counsel for the defense. His tone was calm, precise, his words chosen carefully. He outlined his standing, his reasons, and his intent. The prosecutor objected briefly, citing timing and procedure. Daniel responded without raising his voice. He spoke of due process, of newly surfaced evidence, of the court's obligation to consider material facts regardless of inconvenience. His argument was concise, respectful, and difficult to dismiss. Judge Whitaker considered for a moment, then nodded. The request is granted. Marcus felt a subtle shift inside his chest. Not hope exactly, but possibility. Daniel did not waste time. "Your Honor," he said, "the defense submits newly discovered evidence for consideration by the court and the jury." A court clerk approached. Daniel handed over a digital storage device, labeled carefully. "This video," Daniel continued, "was recorded by an eyewitness on the day of Mr. Hill's arrest." A murmur spread through the room. The prosecutor stiffened. Daniel spoke on. Before its presentation, the defense requests independent verification of the footage's authenticity. Judge Whitaker nodded. "Proceed." An independent technology review team had been arranged in advance. They entered the courtroom shortly thereafter. 2 men and a woman, dressed plainly, carrying equipment cases. The lead analyst, Dr. Karen Liu, was in her early 40s, with short black hair and a composed, analytical expression. She had built her career in digital forensics, known for her meticulous methods and reluctance to overstate conclusions. Dr. Liu explained the process clearly. The video would be examined for signs of manipulation, compression artifacts, synthetic generation, or alteration. Metadata would be reviewed. Audio waveforms analyzed. The courtroom waited. Marcus sat still, heart pounding softly against his ribs. For the first time since the arrest, he felt something other than isolation. He felt seen. After what felt like an hour but was only minutes, Dr. Liu returned to the stand. "Our findings are conclusive," she said. "The video is authentic. It has not been edited, altered, or generated using artificial intelligence. The audio and visual components are continuous and consistent with a single, uninterrupted recording." Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. The judge nodded once. "The evidence is admitted." Daniel turned slightly toward Marcus. "They're going to hear you," he said quietly. The video played. Marcus listened to his own voice fill the room. Steady, respectful, unmistakable. For the first time, it was not filtered through reports or summaries. It existed as it had happened. His requests, his tone, the officer's responses, the moment when reason was ignored. When the recording ended, no one spoke immediately. Daniel rose. "For the first time," he said, addressing the court, "Mr. Hill's words are being heard in full, without interpretation, without omission." He did not argue further. He did not dramatize. He let the evidence stand on its own. Marcus took the stand briefly afterward, answering only a few clarifying questions. This time the room listened. As proceedings recessed, the weight that had pressed on Marcus for days eased, just slightly. He did not know how this would end. But for the first time, justice felt possible, not promised, but present. Speculation, but with consequence. What had once been treated as a routine appeal now carried the unmistakable gravity of discovery. Marcus Hill sat quietly at the defense table, his posture unchanged, but something in his expression had shifted. He was no longer bracing himself to be ignored. He was listening, because now others were listening too. Daniel Parker stood when the judge signaled for arguments to continue. He did not raise his voice. He did not pace. He spoke with the same controlled clarity that had defined his career, a tone shaped by years of choosing restraint over theater. His words were precise, each sentence building upon verified fact rather than assumption. Daniel began by addressing the inconsistencies between the officer's written reports and the authenticated video. He pointed out the exact timestamps where Marcus had requested identification, the moments when procedure required de-escalation, and the absence of any verbal warning prior to physical force. He framed each point carefully, not as accusation, but as contradiction, allowing the evidence to do the work. He then shifted to the question that had lingered since the arrest: the cameras. "Your Honor," Daniel said, "this stop occurred on a section of roadway known for repeated surveillance failures that, until now, have gone unquestioned." The prosecutor objected, citing relevance. Judge Whitaker overruled without hesitation. Daniel presented maintenance logs obtained through emergency subpoena. The documents showed a pattern. The same cameras malfunctioning repeatedly, always for short windows, always restored without formal repair tickets. He noted the timing of those outages aligned closely with prior traffic stops conducted by the same officers. A low murmur moved through the courtroom. Daniel called the next witness, a city infrastructure technician named Miguel Alvarez. Miguel was in his late 20s, slender, with tired eyes and oil-stained hands that betrayed long hours of manual work. He spoke plainly, uncomfortable in a suit but earnest. He testified that he had been dispatched multiple times to the Oak Ridge Parkway cameras, only to find wiring deliberately loosened, not worn or weather-damaged. "That doesn't happen by accident," Miguel said quietly. "Someone had to open the housing." The court recessed briefly. When proceedings resumed, the scope had changed. The judge authorized an expanded inquiry. Investigators were dispatched. Records were pulled. Internal Affairs stepped in. Officer Daniel Reeves was the first to be called back to the stand. Gone was the stiff confidence he had worn during the initial hearing. His uniform was replaced by a plain shirt and slacks. His posture was rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting toward his former partner. Reeves denied wrongdoing at first. He spoke of pressure, of difficult shifts, of split-second decisions. But when financial records were introduced, small, irregular cash deposits made on days corresponding with camera outages, his answers faltered. Officer Mark Collins followed. Older, heavier, his expression carried a weary resignation. Collins had always relied on experience to shield him from scrutiny. This time, it failed. He admitted to knowing about the camera tampering, though he insisted it had been routine and temporary. Daniel's voice remained calm. Routine for what purpose? Collins hesitated. To avoid complications, he said finally. The phrase hung in the air, hollow and damning. Further investigation revealed the full pattern. The officers had targeted that stretch of road because it offered privacy without oversight. Minor bribes had been accepted, cash to ignore paperwork issues to avoid tickets, to let drivers go with a warning. It had started small. It had grown easier, until it didn't. The court concluded its findings swiftly. Both officers were found to have violated departmental procedure, abused their authority, and engaged in misconduct. Their actions were deemed deliberate, not incidental. The ruling was read into the record. Immediate termination from the police force. Referral for criminal charges related to corruption and obstruction of justice. Reeves stared straight ahead. Color drained from his face. Collins lowered his head, eyes closed, as if acknowledging an ending he had long postponed. Marcus listened in silence. There was no satisfaction in his expression, only relief, tempered by the knowledge of how easily this could have gone another way. Daniel placed a hand briefly on Marcus's shoulder. It was not celebratory. It was grounding. Outside the courtroom, the city reacted in waves. News outlets revised headlines. Commentators spoke with new caution. The story shifted from accusation to examination, from certainty to accountability. At home, Sarah Hill watched the coverage with quiet intensity. She sat upright on the couch, hands folded in her lap, eyes steady. Sarah had always believed in systems, even when they disappointed her. Seeing the truth acknowledged did not erase her fear, but it softened it. Across town, Ethan Parker sat beside his mother at the kitchen table. Sarah Parker's face was pale, but her eyes were bright with something close to pride. Ethan listened as reporters explained the investigation's findings, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. "I did the right thing," he said softly, not as a question. "Yes," his mother replied. "You did?" Back in the courtroom, Judge Whitaker addressed the room one final time. He spoke of accountability, of trust, of the responsibility carried by those who wield authority. His words were firm, unembellished, final. For Marcus, the truth had finally been exposed. Not because it was convenient, but because it had been preserved. And that made all the difference. The courtroom was quiet when the final ruling was read, the kind of quiet that follows a long-held breath finally released. Marcus Hill stood as the words reached him. Clear, formal, irreversible. Not guilty. The charges were dismissed in full. The order for his immediate release was entered into the record. There was no flourish, no applause. Justice arrived the way it often does when it is real. Plain, direct, undeniable. Marcus felt the tension leave his shoulders first, then his chest. He had imagined this moment many times, but none of those imagined versions had prepared him for how still he would feel when it finally came. Relief was there, yes, but it moved quietly, careful not to overwhelm him. He looked toward Daniel Parker, who met his eyes and nodded once. No smile, no raised fist, just acknowledgement. They both understood that dignity, not celebration, belonged here. Sarah Hill rose from the bench behind him. She was tall and slender, her posture calm even as her hands trembled slightly. Sarah had spent years learning to steady herself for others. Patients at the clinic, neighbors who leaned on her patience, Marcus himself when the world pressed in. Her empathy had been shaped by witnessing pain up close, by the knowledge that systems often required human kindness to make them bearable. When she reached Marcus, she wrapped her arms around him gently, as if afraid that too much force might break something newly mended. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, microphones poised, questions already forming. The doors opened, and Marcus stepped into daylight that felt brighter than it had that morning. He shielded his eyes briefly, not from cameras, but from the unfamiliar sensation of standing in public without accusation attached to his name. Daniel stood beside him, composed as ever. He declined interviews with a raised hand and a polite shake of his head. "The ruling speaks for itself," he said once, and no more. That evening, Oak Ridge watched. Television screens across the city carried the story that had transformed over days from certainty to correction. Anchors spoke more carefully now. They used words like exonerated, evidence, and independent verification. The footage was not aired in full, but the outcome was unmistakable. A wrong had been acknowledged. A record had been set straight. In the Hill living room, the television remained on low volume as Marcus sat on the couch, feet planted on the floor, hands resting on his knees. Sarah sat beside him, her head tilted slightly toward his shoulder. The room smelled faintly of dinner she had prepared earlier and never finished. A small, ordinary detail, unfinished food, felt strangely profound. Life, interrupted, was resuming. Across town, in the Parker apartment, the same broadcast played. Ethan Parker sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging gently beneath the chair. He was quieter than usual, his eyes fixed on the screen. His mother, Sarah Parker, moved carefully around the kitchen, her steps measured. The accident had taught her patience with her body and caution with the world, but it had not dulled her sense of right and wrong. When the anchor announced the verdict, she stopped, closed her eyes briefly, and exhaled. Ethan looked up at her. "He's free," he said. "Yes," she replied, "because you helped." Later that night, Daniel Parker sat alone in his home office. The room was spare, bookshelves lined with legal volumes, a desk polished smooth by years of use, a single lamp casting a warm circle of light. He opened his laptop and navigated to a social media account with no name attached to it, no photograph, no biography. An account he had created years earlier for moments like this, moments when truth mattered more than credit. He uploaded the video. No commentary, no explanation, just the footage. Within minutes, it began to move. Shares multiplied, comments flooded in. The video crossed neighborhoods, cities, states. People recognized the tone of Marcus's voice, the restraint in his words, the unmistakable absence of aggression. They recognized, too, the familiar pattern of authority refusing accountability. By morning, the video had reached far beyond Oak Ridge. Community centers projected it onto walls during meetings. Churches discussed it after services. College classrooms paused lectures to examine it frame by frame. For many, it was more than evidence. It was validation, proof that what they had experienced was not imagined, not isolated. In Oak Ridge's South End, a small gathering formed in front of a mural painted years earlier to honor unnamed victims of injustice. Candles flickered beneath the image. People stood together, some silent, some speaking softly. They did not cheer. They reflected. A victory, they knew, did not erase the losses that came before it. But it did remind them that the fight was not futile. Daniel watched the response unfold with quiet distance. He did not read every message. He did not engage. He understood the power of stepping back once the truth had been released. His phone buzzed repeatedly with calls he did not answer. Requests for interviews, invitations to speak. He ignored them all. What he did notice was the name. It appeared first in a comment, then in a headline, then in conversation. People spoke it with gratitude, sometimes with disbelief. The black community's lawyer. Daniel closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. He had never chosen that title, never sought it. Titles, he believed, were earned by consistency, not claimed by intention. If people needed a name for what he had done, he would accept it without attachment. Because tomorrow, there would be another case. Back at the Hill home, Marcus stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, the street quiet. A neighbor's dog, a medium-sized mixed breed with graying fur and alert eyes, passed by on a leash, tail wagging gently. The small normalcy of it all grounded him. He looked up at the sky, clear now, stars faint but present. For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to imagine the future without rehearsing defense strategies or court dates. He thought of work, of routine, of the simple dignity of being unremarkable again. The light beyond the courtroom doors had not blinded him. It had shown him the way back. At the end of this story, the lesson is not about winning a courtroom battle. It is about how ordinary choices shape justice long before a verdict is read. Marcus Hill did not raise his voice. He did not fight back. He chose calm, dignity, and respect, even when the system failed him. Ethan Parker did not plan to become a witness. He simply chose not to look away. Daniel Parker did not seek recognition. He chose integrity over comfort. None of them were trying to be heroes. They were trying to do what was right in small, human ways. In everyday life, justice often begins quietly. It begins when we treat people with respect even when they are different from us. It begins when we question unfairness without hatred. It begins when we tell the truth, even when staying silent would be easier. Racial prejudice does not always appear as violence. Sometimes it appears as assumptions, careless words, or indifference. And those small moments, repeated daily, shape the world we live in. This story reminds us that systems only work when people inside them choose responsibility. Authority without accountability is dangerous, but courage, even from unexpected places, can restore balance. A child with a phone, a citizen asking for his rights, a lawyer refusing to look away all remind us that justice is fragile, but not powerless. If this story moved you, let it move you gently into action. Speak with more empathy. Listen before judging. Protect truth when you see it. Teach your children that doing the right thing matters even when it is uncomfortable. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Comment with your thoughts, your experiences, and the lessons you took from it. If you believe in fairness, dignity, and truth, please like this story, share it, and subscribe to the channel so more voices can be heard. And for those who believe in prayer, may God bless everyone watching today. Protect the innocent, and guide us toward justice and compassion. If this message touched your heart, comment Amen below.